I never really thought much of Nate until that night in the locker room. I mean, yeah, we were teammates. I saw him almost every day. We joked around during drills, grabbed protein shakes after gym sessions, and once even split a lift when our cars were both in the shop. But we weren't exactly friends. We never hung out one-on-one. He was a starter, a junior, a beast on the field. I was a freshman trying to prove I deserved to be on the team at all. So yeah, Nate existed in that distant, I respect you, but you're out of my league kind of space, until everything shifted. That night was a Thursday, cold, wet, and brutal. Coach ran us into the ground because of how sloppy our defense had been the past weekend. The field was a mess, muddy and slick, and by the time we got back to the locker room, my legs were jelly. Everyone looked dead. The room was quiet, except for the sounds of cleats on tile and grunts as gear hit benches. I was the last one into the showers. Not because I was stalling or anything. It just took me forever to untangle the disgusting mass of wet socks, pads, and tape I had on. By the time I stepped under the hot water, most of the guys were already wrapping up. Nate was still there, though. I didn't even notice at first. I was busy letting the water pummel the back of my neck, trying to stop the dull ache that had settled into my shoulders. When I finally opened my eyes, Nate was just standing there, a few feet away under the spray, facing me, not looking at me, just there. We made eye contact for a second. It felt like way longer than it probably was. He gave me a little nod, like, sup, and I gave him one back. That should have been it. But something about the look in his eyes made my skin go tight. Not because he looked mad or weird or anything, just focused. Like I'd suddenly moved from the edge of his awareness into the center of it. I told myself I was imagining things. It had been a long practice. I was tired, sore, probably dehydrated. I turned my back, focused on washing the mud off my arms. But then I heard him say something. "You always that quiet?" I turned around slowly. He was still under the spray, soap in one hand, hair slicked back. His chest looked ridiculously defined in the water, like something out of a fitness ad. I had no idea what to say. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Just noticed you don't really talk much," he said with a shrug. "Not like the rest of the guys." "I talk," I said, instantly defensive. "Just not all the time." He smirked. "Didn't say it was a bad thing." I let the water hit me again. My skin was too hot now, and I wasn't sure if it was the temperature or the conversation. "You play different too," Nate added. I glanced at him again. He was still casually lathering up, not looking at me directly now. "Different how?" I asked. "More controlled. Smarter," he said. "Like you think 2 plays ahead. Most guys just chase the ball." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't even know he'd been paying attention to how I played. Most days it felt like I was invisible out there. "Thanks," I said finally. That made him look at me again. This time the smirk was gone. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's just the truth." And then he reached up and turned off the shower, like the moment was over. Like he hadn't just said something that was gonna live rent-free in my head for the next year. He grabbed a towel, slung it around his hips, and walked out of the shower area like it was just any other Thursday. But it wasn't, not for me. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying our conversation, overanalyzing every word, every glance. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that Nate was just being friendly. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I just didn't know how much. The next day, everything felt normal again. Or at least, it was supposed to. Nate didn't say anything weird at practice. He didn't give me any looks, didn't act like our shower conversation had happened at all. He ran drills, barked out plays, shoved one of the linebackers when he missed a tackle. Just regular Nate stuff. But now that I'd seen that other side of him, that quiet, focused, almost curious version, I couldn't unsee it. It stuck in my brain like a splinter. Every time he passed me on the field, I caught myself watching the way his shoulders moved, the way he chewed the inside of his cheek when he was thinking, the way his jaw flexed when he was annoyed. He had become this constant presence in my head, and it was driving me insane. After practice, I was walking out toward the lot when I heard someone call my name. I turned around, and there he was again. Nate, towel slung over his shoulder, bag in hand. "You need a ride?" he asked casually, like it wasn't out of the ordinary at all. I hesitated. I was gonna walk. "It's like a 30-minute walk, dude. Come on, I got room." I nodded before my brain could tell me not to. "Yeah, sure." His car was older than I expected. Not beat up or anything, just plain. It smelled like gym socks and spearmint gum inside, and the passenger seat was covered in old Gatorade bottles and crumpled protein bar wrappers. "Just throw that junk in the back," he said, starting the engine. I did as he said and climbed in. We drove in silence for the first few minutes. The windows were cracked open, letting in the cool, late fall air. The sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows over the road. I didn't know where to look, so I stared at my hands. "So what do you do outside of this?" he asked, eyes still on the road. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Outside football," he said. "You got any hobbies? Clubs? Secret identity as a poet or something?" I laughed, caught off guard. "Not unless you count late-night gaming and eating too many Doritos." Nate smirked. "That counts." We lapsed into silence again. It wasn't awkward, just quiet, comfortable almost. He turned the music down and glanced at me. "You ever think about quitting?" I frowned. "Quitting football?" "Yeah." I thought about it for a second. Sometimes, when I feel like I'm not good enough, or when coach is on my ass every other day. "Yeah," Nate said. "I get that." I glanced over at him. You're like the guy." He shrugged. "Doesn't mean I don't think about it." There was something in his voice, tired, honest, that caught me off guard. Nate had always seemed like the one who had it all figured out. Confident, solid. But now, sitting in his car, with the light hitting half his face and his jaw tight like he was holding something back, I realized I didn't know him at all. "Thanks for the ride," I said as he pulled up outside my apartment. He looked at me for a second before answering. "Yeah, anytime." I opened the door and stepped out, my backpack slung over one shoulder. Just as I was about to shut it, he leaned over. "You free this weekend?" he asked. I blinked. I think so." "My roommate's out of town. I was thinking about ordering food and watching the game. You in?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm in." He nodded. "Cool." And then he drove off. I stood there for a second, staring at the empty street, wondering what the hell that had been. Nate had never invited me to hang out before, but maybe that was just what teammates did. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Or maybe not. By the time Saturday rolled around, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. We were just going to watch the game. That's what teammates did. Guys on the team hung out all the time. Ordered wings, yelled at the TV, called each other names. It didn't have to mean anything. Still, I spent an embarrassing amount of time figuring out what to wear. I settled on something casual. Hoodie, jeans, the same sneakers I wore to class. Nothing special. But when I got to Nate's apartment, my palms were sweating, like I was walking into a date instead of a football hangout. He opened the door before I even knocked. "Yo," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Hey," I said, pretending I hadn't just rehearsed 10 different ways to greet him. His apartment was cleaner than I expected. Minimalist, kind of bare, a couch, a TV, a few posters on the wall. One of those places you could tell guys lived in, but at least they had a vacuum. "Food's on the way," he said, nodding toward the coffee table. "Got wings, fries, mozzarella sticks. That cool?" "Perfect," I said, sitting down. He tossed me a can of soda and flopped onto the couch beside me, grabbing the remote. The game was already on, some out-of-conference rivalry with teams neither of us cared about. But the noise helped fill the space. We watched in silence for a while. Every now and then he'd make a comment, and I'd respond, but mostly it was just comfortable. Like we'd been doing this for years. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you didn't play?" he asked during a commercial. I shrugged. "Probably flunking out of school." He smirked. "Same. I glanced over at him. He was sitting in that relaxed way he always did. Legs spread, one arm slung across the back of the couch. So casual. Like, none of this meant anything. But every time his knee brushed mine, I noticed. After the food came and we'd both eaten more than we should have, we settled deeper into the couch. The game got more intense, but I couldn't focus. I was hyper aware of how close we were sitting now. We weren't touching, not really. But the space between us had shrunk. I shifted slightly, and so did he. Our legs pressed together. Just for a second, just enough. He didn't move. Neither did I. "Hey," he said suddenly, and I turned to look at him. He was watching me, not the game. "Yeah?" He hesitated for half a beat. "You ever wonder about stuff?" My heart skipped. Stuff? Like things you never thought you'd think about. That wasn't an accident. The way he said it. The way his eyes didn't move from mine. I swallowed. "Sometimes," the silence stretched. "I think I've been wondering a lot lately," he said. "About people, and what things mean, and maybe why I feel different when I'm around someone." My throat went dry. I wanted to say something. Anything. But he kept going. "You ever notice someone more than you should?" he asked. "Like, you keep telling yourself it's nothing, but it doesn't go away?" "Yeah," I said quietly. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "I think that's been happening to me." The room was completely still. The game was still playing, the crowd on the screen roaring, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, slowly, carefully, Nate shifted. His arm was still stretched behind me on the couch. He moved his fingers just enough that they brushed my shoulder. Barely. I didn't move. He was close now, not leaning in, not rushing it, just there. "I don't want to mess anything up," he said quietly, "but I don't want to ignore it either." I turned my head, just enough to face him. "You're not," I said. His eyes flicked down to my mouth for the briefest second, then back up to my eyes. And then, without saying another word, he leaned in. His lips hovered just a breath away from mine. Not quite touching. Not quite pulling back either. I don't know how long we sat like that, but it felt like everything in the room, the TV, the lights, the outside world, had gone completely still. I could feel the warmth of his breath, the way his fingers barely touched the back of my shoulder, and I knew this wasn't just a moment of confusion or a joke, or something he'd laugh off later. This was Nate, making a move, and waiting to see if I'd meet him halfway. So I did. I closed the space between us and kissed him. It wasn't fireworks or some epic cinematic moment. It was tentative, slow, almost unsure. Our lips met with this strange mix of softness and hesitation. But then I felt him exhale, like he'd been holding it in for too long, and his hand moved to the back of my neck, pulling me in closer. That's when it shifted. The kiss deepened, and suddenly all the uncertainty melted away. It was just us, pressed together on his couch like it had been building toward this for weeks, and we'd both finally stopped running from it. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "Shit," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "What?" He shook his head quickly. No, I mean, that was good. Really good. Just didn't expect it to feel like that." I laughed under my breath, nervous but kind of relieved. "Yeah, me either." He leaned back slightly, studying me. His expression wasn't cocky or teasing like it usually was. It was open, real. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Are you?" He nodded. "Just processing. I didn't think you'd kiss me back." "I've been wanting to," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile was quiet but immediate. "Same." There was another long pause, but it wasn't awkward this time. It felt like we'd stepped into some new space between us, and we were both trying to get our footing. "I don't know what this means," Nate said finally. "Like, for real. I've never done anything like this before. Not with a guy." I nodded. "Me either. Not like this." He rubbed the back of his neck. a habit I'd seen 100 times on the field when he was nervous. I'm not saying this has to be anything, like labeled or figured out. I just know that I like being around you, and I wanted that. And I don't regret it. Me either, I said. His eyes softened. Good. We didn't talk much more after that. The rest of the game played out in the background, forgotten. At some point, we just sat shoulder to shoulder, his leg pressed against mine, not moving, not needing to. When it got late and I stood up to leave, Nate walked me to the door. Before I stepped out, he reached for my hand. Just for a second. Text me when you get back, he said, so I know you got home okay. That tiny gesture hit me harder than the kiss. Yeah, I said, I will. And then I left. Walking back to my apartment that night felt surreal. The cold air barely registered. My brain couldn't stop replaying everything. The kiss, the way his voice had dropped when he told me he liked being around me, the way his hand lingered in mine. Something had changed. I just didn't know what it meant yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Nate wasn't just my teammate anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again. His hand at the back of my neck, the way he said, I didn't expect it to feel like that. It was the kind of memory that played on a loop, looping tighter and tighter until I couldn't tell if I was excited or terrified. The next morning I woke up groggy, half convinced it had all been a dream. But when I grabbed my phone, there was a text from Nate. Nate, you alive? I smiled like an idiot. Barely. You? He replied almost instantly. Nate, hungover on mozzarella sticks. I didn't know what the rules were now. Were we texting casually? Was I allowed to flirt? Was he? But I didn't get long to think about it, because Monday came fast, and with it, the return to practice and reality. I showed up to the locker room early, trying not to overthink it. Nate wasn't there yet. A couple guys were already lacing up, talking about stats and fantasy leagues and some party from the weekend. I kept my head down, changed fast, and told myself to act normal. Then he walked in. He nodded at a few teammates, tossed his bag down, and shot me a quick glance. Just a glance, not a smile, not a hey. I felt my chest tighten. So that was it? We were back to nothing? He sat 2 benches away, like usual, didn't say a word. The whole practice, I caught myself looking over, waiting for something. A signal, a look, anything. But he didn't give me one. He wasn't cold or different exactly. He was just Nate, the same Nate everyone else saw, joking with linemen, barking at rookies, running routes like his life depended on it. I felt like a ghost. Or worse, like a secret. After we showered and changed, I was one of the last ones out again. I didn't even care anymore if he was walking out too. I just wanted to get home and shut my brain off. But as I stepped into the hallway, I heard him call my name. Wait up, he said. I turned around, heart racing. He jogged to catch up, walking beside me. Neither of us said anything at first. Then he rubbed the back of his neck, that nervous gesture I now recognized too well. Sorry I didn't say anything earlier, he muttered. It's fine, I said, trying to sound chill. Didn't expect you to. He gave me a sideways look. That's not true, I didn't answer. I just didn't know how to act, he said. I didn't want to make it weird, especially around the team. Yeah, I said quietly. I get it. We reached the parking lot and I turned toward my building. Hey, he said, stopping me. You want to come over later? I paused. To hang out? He gave a small, almost shy smile. Yeah. And maybe not just hang out. I exhaled, all the tension in my chest releasing at once. Yeah, I'd like that. Later that night, I showed up at his place again. He opened the door with that same look in his eyes, like he was thinking too much, but also couldn't help himself. He let me in, and before I could say anything, he kissed me again. This time was different. It wasn't hesitant or cautious. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And when he pulled away, both of us breathing a little heavier, he whispered, I've been thinking about this all day. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because so had I. After that night, everything changed. Not dramatically, not in a movie scene way, but quietly, subtly. Like the moment when fall turns into winter. and you don't notice until you see your breath in the morning air. Nate didn't talk about it much. We didn't define anything. There were no "what are we" conversations. But the looks lingered longer now. His touches felt different, and most nights, if I waited long enough, I'd get a text. "Nate, you up?" "Yeah." "Nate, come over." And I would. It wasn't just about kissing, though that never got old. Sometimes we'd lie on his couch, half watching a game, his hand resting on my leg. Sometimes he'd grab my hoodie when I stood up to leave and pull me back down beside him, mumbling, "Just 5 more minutes." Sometimes I'd wake up next to him, his arm thrown over my chest like it belonged there. But during the day, in public, on the field, we were just teammates again. At first, I was okay with that. I got it. It wasn't just about us. There were teammates, friends, family, expectations. The world didn't pause just because something was happening between us. But after a while, the split between the two versions of us started to wear on me. Like one night when we were out getting food with a few other guys, Nate sat on the opposite end of the table. Someone cracked a joke about Tinder, and one of the guys nudged Nate, asking if he was still seeing that girl from the bar a few weeks back. Nate laughed, played along, deflected with something vague and straight and safe. And I sat there, pretending it didn't sting. Back at his apartment later that night, I didn't say anything. I just kissed him hard, maybe harder than I meant to, and when he pulled back, breathless, he looked at me like he knew. "What's wrong?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing." He paused, watching me. "You sure?" I didn't answer. I just pulled him back in. That was the thing. When we were alone, he was all in. There were no walls, no hesitation. But the second we stepped outside his apartment, he became someone else, and I couldn't help but wonder how long that was going to work. A few days later, after another late practice, we were sitting in his car again. It was raining, light, steady drops tapping against the windshield. We weren't in a hurry to get out. Nate was staring straight ahead, his hands still on the steering wheel. "You ever feel like you're split in two?" he said suddenly. I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Like there's the version of you that everyone sees, the one who says the right things and plays the role and does what's expected. And then there's the version you only let out when no one's looking." I didn't say anything. "Lately," he said, "I feel like I'm running out of space between those two versions." I reached over, resting my hand on his. He turned, looked at me, and then he asked, "What are we doing, man?" It wasn't angry or scared, just real. I took a breath. "I don't know. Because I keep thinking about you. During the day. On the field. Everywhere. And then I catch myself, and I shut it down, and I hate that I have to." "You don't have to," I said quietly. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking that over. Then he turned off the engine. "Come inside." I did. That night we didn't do anything. No kissing, no touching. Just lay next to each other on his bed, both of us staring at the ceiling, the quiet between us finally starting to feel honest. And for the first time, it felt like we weren't hiding from it anymore. The next few weeks were the hardest. Not because anything went wrong, but because everything stayed the same. Nate and I kept falling into this rhythm, this pattern. We'd stay late after practice and find excuses to walk home together. We'd meet up on weekends under the pretense of watching tape or studying plays. I'd crash at his place more often than not. Sometimes we'd talk late into the night. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. But when it came to everyone else, we stayed quiet. It was like our own little universe existed in the cracks between our regular lives. And I tried to convince myself that was enough. Then one night, it slipped. We were at another team gathering. Someone's birthday. A casual hangout at an off-campus house. Loud music, beer pong, girls shouting at each other in the kitchen. Nate and I weren't even supposed to show up at the same time, but we did. We barely acknowledged each other. That had become the unspoken rule. Play it cool, stay invisible. I ended up on the back porch, trying to get some air, scrolling through my phone like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Nate showed up, maybe 10 minutes later. Said nothing, just leaned against the railing next to me. We stood like that for a while, both facing out into the dark backyard. The music was muffled from inside, voices buzzing through the walls. Then he said, "You want to get out of here?" My chest tightened. "You sure?" He nodded once, but didn't look at me. We left through the side gate, didn't say goodbye to anyone. We walked down the street, the night air sharp and cool, the houses all glowing warm behind their curtains. Back at his place, things moved fast. There was something different about the way he kissed me that night. Less hesitant, less careful, like he was tired of pretending. Like something in him had cracked open and all the weight he'd been carrying came pouring out. We made it to his bedroom, shedding jackets and shoes and whatever else, and I didn't care about questions or labels or what tomorrow might look like. All I cared about was that he was there, and he wanted me to be there too. Afterward, we lay there tangled up in each other, his hand on my chest, my fingers tracing the edge of his wrist. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "This feels real." I turned my head. "It is." "I don't want to keep hiding," he said. "I'm tired." "Then don't." He nodded slowly. "I think I want people to know. Not everything, just us, in some way." I didn't say anything, I just pulled him closer. Because I knew how big that was for him. For us. We fell asleep like that. But nothing ever stays quiet for long. The next morning, someone knocked on Nate's apartment door. Loud. Sharp. We froze. He pulled on a pair of sweats and opened the door a crack. I couldn't see who it was, but I could hear the voice. "Dude, what the hell?" It was Liam, one of the other starters. One of Nate's closest friends on the team. "Are you seriously skipping film study again?" Liam said, and then his voice dropped. "Wait, are you with someone?" Nate stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. I sat up in bed, pulse racing. I couldn't hear the rest of the conversation. But when Nate came back in a few minutes later, he looked pale. Quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, eyes on the floor. I think he knows. That week felt like walking a tightrope over open air. Liam didn't say anything, at least not to me, but I noticed the way he started watching Nate more closely during practice. The way his jokes with the other guys turned quieter when we were around. The way he avoided eye contact with both of us, like he was trying to work something out in his head. And Nate was different too. He still texted me, still let me crash at his place, but he was quieter, more distracted, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally did 3 days later. We were in the weight room, mid-set, when Liam came up behind Nate and said, "You got a minute?" Nate nodded, wiped his hands on a towel, and followed him into the hall. I watched through the window as they talked. Low voices, serious expressions. Nate didn't look angry. Just tense. Defensive, maybe. Then Liam said something, and Nate flinched. Just a little. Like it hit harder than he expected. When he came back in, he didn't say a word. Just finished his set and left early. That night, I didn't hear from him. Or the next night. By the third, I started to worry. I told myself to leave it alone, to give him space. But that only lasted an hour. Then I grabbed my jacket and walked to his place. He opened the door like he hadn't slept much. "Hey," he said quietly. I stepped in, and he closed the door behind me. "What happened?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his face. Liam knows. He figured it out. He's not mad, just confused, I guess. Said he's not going to say anything, but it's weird now. "I'm sorry," I said. "Not your fault." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you ever regret this?" It hit me like a punch. "No," I said, fast. "Do you?" He shook his head. "No, I didn't think it would get this real. I didn't think I'd care this much." I stepped closer. "That's a good thing, Nate." "I know. It just scares the hell out of me." We stood there in his kitchen, both of us silent. Then he said, "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't care if people figure it out. I just want to be able to walk around campus with you. I want to be able to look at you like I look at you when we're alone. I don't want to feel like this part of me has to stay hidden forever. I swallowed the lump in my throat. So don't. You'd be okay with that? I nodded. More than okay. He stepped forward, touched my face with both hands, and kissed me softly. We didn't come out with a big announcement. There was no Instagram post or locker room speech. We just stopped hiding. People noticed. A few stared. Most didn't care. Liam eventually came around. Said he didn't get it at first, but he saw how different Nate was when he was with me. Calmer. Lighter. Whatever it is, Liam said, clapping me on the back one day after practice. Just don't screw it up. I didn't plan to. Nate and I still had rough days. We still had to deal with whispers, with people who didn't know how to react, with moments that made us question whether this was worth the risk. But then there were the other moments. The ones that reminded me exactly why it was. Late night drives, just the two of us. Post-practice dinners where he'd rest his hand on my leg under the table. The way he'd pull me into his chest and mumble, "You're the only person who makes me feel like I can breathe." Yeah, we were teammates once. But somewhere along the line, we became something else, something real.